Jindal, Bobby, thank you so much for being with us.
Hello.
Micah, thank you for having me back.
Have you on?
Governor, let me start with a very subtle question. Are you going to run for president?
Yeah.
Well, look, I'm thinking about it, but Joey, I'll tell you, anybody who's thinking about running, Democrat or Republican, needs to be thinking about the serious challenges facing this country and where they would take this country.
What's the top challenge?
Well, so for example, yesterday I unveiled a plan on education. How do we actually restore educational equal opportunity for all students with school choice, with getting the federal government out of the local classrooms? We've done plans on energy independence.
Let's stick with education, though, first.
Sure. And then we'll come back to the biggest challenge.
And then we'll keep going. But you talked about education, so let's talk about Common Core. Right now, Jeb Bush getting hammered by conservative activists because he supported Common Core. You also supported Common Core. What changed?
Well, Joe, what changed was we were told this was going to be a voluntary state-led effort for high standards.
Right.
I'm all for high standards. I'm all for state-led. I'm all for voluntary.
Right.
That's not what Common Core became. Instead, it became a top-down, one-size-fits-all approach. So philosophically...
How did that happen?
Well, you look at the way the standards were developed. They didn't have public input. There was no chance. You have copyrighted standards, so the states can't change them. There was no chance for input from higher educational officials or parents or teachers. Right. Secondly, the federal government come in and say, if you want race to the top funding, if you want No Child Left Behind waivers, you've got to adopt Common Core.
So the money, federal money, suddenly became attached to a group of standards that were supposed to be voluntary.
That's exactly right.
So it really stopped being voluntary.
That's exactly right. And 85% of these standards you're not allowed to change. And then the second thing that happened, so it's stopped being voluntary, but secondly, you actually look at the content of the standards, and you look especially at the math homework.
Right.
Any of us that have young school children, my little boy last year in the second grade brought home his math homework.
Yeah.
And Joe, he could get all the answers right, but the way Common Core makes you show your work in math is counterintuitive. Even a lot of math professors say, why are we frustrating kids?
So Jeb Bush obviously supports Common Core. He's going to make this a key issue. Is that a big mistake? And what does that say about Jeb Bush to you?
Well, no, two things. One, I think the good news is voters get to decide. I think those that want to make the argument that the federal government should be more involved in education, whether it's curriculum or standards or No Child Left Behind, they should make that case. And the voters should get to hear that debate. I think that when Congress is now talking about reauthorizing No Child Left Behind, why not block grant the dollars? I think the federal Department of Education should be focused on civil rights, transparency, deregulation, and that's it. They don't have any business making curriculum or standards or other decisions.
Is Jeb Bush a big government Republican?
No, I think that those that want, on this issue, those that want the federal government more involved in education, go make that case. But look, I also disagree with No Child Left Behind. The good news is you and I won't get to decide this. The voters will get to decide it. And if they want a Republican candidate that's for Common Core, there'll be, I'm sure, more than one. If they want a Republican candidate that's against Common Core, I'm sure there'll be more than one.
Oh, no.
All right, Dana Milbank calls you a broken record. He says, in part, Louisiana's travails are particularly problematic because they've been caused in large part by Bobby Jindal's tax cuts, which, along with declining oil revenue, blew such a hole in the state budget that even huge spending cuts haven't made up the gap. In the last few days, articles in the New York Times and Politico have detailed Louisiana's fiscal travails, including a possible 40% operating budget cut at Louisiana State University and an increase in tuition at public universities of 90% during your time in office. Jindal has already raided state reserve funds and resorted to the sort of budget-keeping gimmicks that he once criticized. Is that true?
No. And it's great that I'm being criticized by the Washington Post and the New York Times. That's wonderful. That'll only help me back home.
I was going to say, isn't it interesting? This appears to be the time for everybody to jump on you. You also had your own state, your own senator, David Vitter, a guy you've worked with in the past, who's also coming out criticizing you.
You know, let's look at what Dana writes, and let's look at the truth. The reality is I campaigned on the promise that we were going to shrink the size of the government, grow the private sector economy. That's exactly what we've done. So we've cut the budget 26%, $9 billion. Over 30,000 fewer state government employees, lowest number in decades. 8 credit upgrades, meaning the highest credit rating in decades. Look at the private sector economy. Our economy has grown twice as fast, nearly twice as fast as the national economy.
So why the budget crisis?
Look, we have falling oil prices. That's great for consumers. It hurts our revenues. But
how much revenue have you, and I bring this point up because a lot of times politicians take credit for things they don't deserve. A lot of times they get blamed for things they don't deserve. I'm not letting you off the hook, but I do, when we hear all of these stories that have been coming out, even before I knew you were coming on the show, I was thinking, yeah, okay, and I bet the governor in North Dakota and Texas over the next 3 years are going to be screwed as well. How much of an impact do falling oil prices have on Louisiana.
So look, every dollar it falls, the price of oil, it costs us about $12 million to the state government. So in the current fiscal year, it's over $200 million. Next fiscal year, it's hundreds of millions of additional dollars, at least close to $400 million at least. And so
basically you're saying Louisiana's in the same position as Iran.
Our economy is diversified. Here's the great news. Here's the great news about our economy. The private sector economy. We're a top 5 state for private sector job creation.
Right.
Not only is our GDP and our economy higher, our per capita income ranking is higher than it's been before. Yeah. So I want you to think about this. In D.C., if somebody said, I'm going to shrink the federal spending, I'm going to balance the budget 7 years in a row without raising taxes, private sector economy is growing twice as fast, 3 times as fast job growth, per capita income is higher than it's ever been before, I think that's a pretty good trade-off.
So if you shrink government and you boost the private sector, those are 2 wins that you can put in the win column. But is the Washington Post wrong when they're talking about the Louisiana State University budget at 40% and 90% increase in tuition?
We haven't proposed
education.
We haven't proposed our budget yet. It will come out February 27th, and I know there's a lot of speculation. They have a continuation budget, and folks like to say, well, if you're not growing fast enough, that's not you're actually cutting. We actually look at the reductions of the budget. It is going to be based on the largely decline on the oil revenue decrease. There'll be some other mandatory cost increases. Yeah. But 7 years in a row, we've balanced our budget. We've not raised taxes. We're going to do it again. The important thing to us is we're going to continue to grow the private sector.
Let me bring in, I don't mean to cut you off, but we're running out of time. There's so many things we want to get to. Gene Robinson, I think the most, Bobby, I know Bobby. I like Bobby. Bobby's a politician, just like I've been a politician. You come on with your talking points, but he has said something that really struck me. We've been talking about how Chris Christie had 8 credit down ratings in New Jersey. Bobby's just said, do I have this right? You've had 8 upgrades. 8 upgrades.
8 upgrades, yeah.
You know, talk is cheap. Talking points are talking points, but you stack Louisiana up to New Jersey. That's pretty strong in a Republican debate, isn't it?
Well, that's very strong in a Republican debate. You know, the question is, you got a better credit rating, so what does it get you in the end? What does it get for the voters? So if the governor would answer that one question, is LSU going to have a big budget cut? That would be one question we could get the answer to right now. Are they going to have a big budget cut, and are they going to end up having like a 90% or thereabouts tuition increase under your administration in the time you've been in office? I'm going to add one thing too. If you guys do have a big budget cut at LSU, if you could just limit it to your football program, I greatly appreciate it. Roll Tide.
I'm amazed you're talking football after what happened in Alabama.
Hey, stop it, Jindal. I'm going to get tough. I'm going to read the whole Milbank article. But Gene asks a good question.
Yeah,
are you going to cut funding for LSU, and is it going to cost 90% more for people to go to LSU?
Look, I don't know where the 90%. I didn't see the 90% number. We have the 2nd lowest tuition in the South, one of the lowest tuition rates in the entire country.
What is the tuition for LSU for a year?
Well,
undergrad.
I mean, I think look, I don't. It's certainly well under $10,000 when you look at fees and housing, and so it's cheaper than other schools in the South, in the SEC. It's 2nd lowest in the South. It's one of the lowest in the country. We're proposing our budget February 27th. We're going to tell the legislature, like we tell them every year, not to focus on reductions in higher education. That has to do more with they protect so many pots of money. But here's the bigger point. You know, going back to we've shrunk government after 25 years in a row. People leaving the state. 7 years in a row, we've had more people come into Louisiana rather than leaving the state.
Right.
I was elected to make big changes because in Louisiana, our economy was stagnant post-Katrina. Our economy is growing. People are voting with their feet. More people work in Louisiana now than ever before, earning a higher income than ever before, more people living there than ever before. We've done statewide school choice. We have transformed our health care system. These are the big changes we were elected to do. Now, I know the Post, the New York Times, they want you to grow the government. That's not the answer.
All right, so I hated to ask that question about LSU, how much the tuition costs. You always hate those questions. How much?
Well, and the good
Mark Halpern's not going to ask you, though, how much a loaf of bread is.
And the good news is there is tops at LSU. For most students, we end up actually paying their tuition.
Yeah, all I can say is get rid of the football program. You'll save a lot of money.
Just to give people a sense of your leadership, judgment, and views, who's been the best American president since Ronald Reagan, and why?
Well, look, obviously I think Ronald Reagan was the best.
Since President Reagan.
Since President
the best
Reagan.
president.
Well, look,
why?
You're asking me basically, since Reagan, we've had 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats. And I think there have been pros and cons. I think George W. Bush did an admirable job protecting our country against the threat. After 9/11, his presidency was largely defined about keeping a safe threat of international terrorism. Right. I disagree with some of the spending decisions domestically. I think when you look at, I disagree with No Child Left Behind. I've never been a fan of that bill in terms of expanding the federal role in education. I think with Part D, it would have been good if we could have put premium support and other reforms in Medicare. Right. But ultimately, President Bush's presidency was redefined because of what happened on 9/11. His first and primary responsibility was to keep us safe. He did that. I know there were a lot of criticisms of his administration. His poll numbers weren't great when he left, but you've got to give him credit. He responded to the biggest challenge of our day. I obviously think that President Obama has been the most radical, most liberal, most ideologically extreme president in growing the size of government. President Bush Sr., you know, I think he certainly is an honorable man who led a great international coalition in Iraq. But if I had to pick between those presidents, I think President Bush, because because he did what I think was the biggest challenge. He responded to the biggest challenge.
So, Bobby, we got to go, but I'm going to ask you very quickly, and if you could give us a fairly quick response. ISIS. We know what Republicans think the president's done wrong with ISIS. Your commander-in-chief today, the generals don't come in to ask you what Barack Obama did wrong. The generals come in and ask, what do we do to stop the spread of ISIS? What's your answer?
A couple of things I think we need to be doing. One, we could be working more closely with the Kurds. They've done a great job protecting persecuted minorities. We need to be doing more to arm them and coordinating with them. You saw it in Kobani. It was an effective combination of airstrikes and Kurdish fighters on the ground. Secondly, we'd be doing more to work with our Turkish allies. They're hesitant to fully press the war against ISIS, the battle against ISIS, because they don't know if we're committed for the long run. They worry that they don't want to benefit Assad and their Iranian sponsors. They feel that they're willing to go after ISIS if they have the understanding that America will not cut and run, that we are committed not only to beating ISIS, but seeing a regime change in Syria, which this president says he's for, but hasn't really committed to.
All right, Bobby Jindal, thank you so much for being with us.
Governor, thank you so much. Good to see you. Still ahead.